Assembly. I'm anti-austerity, and I'm dressed in Edwardian clothing to highlight how this government's austerity policies are threatening to take us back 100 years to before we had a National Health Service and before we had a welfare state to act as a security net for the vulnerable and the needy. I left the London People's Assembly acknowledging that its success would depend upon the actions of the people who attended once they returned to their own regions. That made me think about what I could do to promote this campaign. So I thought about what I wanted to achieve, and I also, importantly, asked myself what I would be prepared to do. Well, what I want to achieve is to attract new people to this campaign by reaching out to those people who are currently feeling helpless, and also to those people who want to get involved but have not yet decided on something they would be comfortable doing. I want to encourage all of those people to find for themselves the next step in involvement that is right for them. So I thought of dressing like this so that people would take notice, so that my message would have greater impact. I had my first outing as anti-austerity in Barnsley Town Centre, where I stood with a placard, and quite a lot of people read my placard and remarked upon it, so it worked. Now, if you'd like to know what my placard said, front and back, check out the video that I posted on YouTube entitled Anti-Austerity Debut. Maybe you'd like to watch that video anyway, along with another one that I intend to post after today, to see if you would find them useful in attracting people to this campaign, by you suggesting that other people watch them too. And since I did my first video, I was invited to come here today to give this account of how I found the next step in involvement that was right for me, and how it brought me to this platform today, which is something that I could never have forecast a few weeks ago. Now, you might already know what you're going to do next, but if you're still undecided, I trust that this event will give you the information and the inspiration to make the decision for yourself what's the next right step in involvement for you. Now, for many of us, that will be attending the lobby of the Tory Party conference on the 29th of September in Manchester. But I'm already thinking about what next. What am I going to do after that? And maybe you are too. So, to help, I'd like to invite everybody here to use, at some time during the day, we've got some post-it notes over here and pens and a board. And if you could jot down all the different types of action that you can think of, pop them on the board, and at some time in the day have a look at what other people have written too. That might just give us all some ideas. Now, we've all of us got our own mix of knowledge, skills and experience. And if we can harness all of that by each of us deciding on something to do that would suit us, or even by thinking of something to do that would challenge us, then we have got a substantial resource. And if we, everybody's efforts in this campaign are valuable, no matter how large or small, because when pulled together, we will create something huge, which cannot fail to have a massive impact. So I'm anti-austerity, and I am honoured to welcome all of you to this event today. Thank you.
Thank you, anti-austerity. To kick off, I should just say a couple of things. One is sincere apologies and best wishes to Tony Benn, who isn't here today. He's actually quite poorly in hospital, so I'm sure we all send him our very best wishes and hope he's doing okay. We do have a great lineup, and I'll kick on with those very soon, but it did occur to me I'd better just say a couple of words about the People's Assembly for anyone who hasn't read the stuff, been to anything yet, or caught up with what on earth we are. The People's Assembly is a national movement, really, that's just starting up. It's a fledgling movement. It's growing. It's holding events around the country. And it's an evolving thing, uniting all of us, right across the board, everybody who is opposed to this current agenda of austerity. It's down to us to build it and to make of it what we will. And today it's brilliant to see everybody here to help us kick off the South Yorkshire leg of that debate and discussion and sharing and coming together. So that's to kind of introduce the day. So I'm missing one speaker, so before I dive into one, can I just check, is Abdul Gooljar here? Right, he's here. Anyway, that's all I wanted to just double check before I start the timings off. We're going to kick off this morning's kind of top table introductory session then with Billy Hayes from the Communication Workers Union. Cheers, Billy.
Okay. Good morning. What used to be dubbed the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire, going back many, many years, and that was because we then had a council in this area that was doing things. We had a Labour leader that was doing things, and I don't know what it's like nowadays, but I imagine it's gone back in many, many ways, like a lot of areas and people in the Labour movement have. But we support, CW is support and part of the People's Assembly because we want to believe in the view that all boats rise together, one struggle encourages another struggle, and so on in terms of getting a perspective on where we face in terms of the situation that we're in. We just come back from the TUC. I had the opportunity on behalf of the CW to move the motion on economic policy, because it really is about the economy and what's happened to the economy when we talk about austerity. There's been a few developments which start to show, we believe, the failure of this government's economic policy. According to the most recent statistics from the Office of National Statistics, the economy has expanded by about 1.8%. And this is an annual growth of about 0.6%, so it's a very anemic increase in the GDP of this country. And the long-term growth of the economy is about 2.4%. So you start to hear this mood music now from the coalition, that things are beginning to turn around and austerity was absolutely worth it. Well, first of all, we're talking about a particular select group of people, because the vast majority of people have seen a reduction in living standards since 2008. But so how do we explain what's taken place in the economy, this tiny growth in the last 6 months as a result of cuts? And I think it's all there in the figures. Between January 2012 and July 2013, government's current spending actually increased by 15.1 billion. And over the same period, there's been a rise in GDP of about 14.8 billion. That's might sound a bit counterintuitive, but just to say that again, between January 2012 and 2013, government spending actually increased. And over the same period, there's been a rise in GDP about 14.8 billion. So government spending has increased by around 15.1 billion and GDP rise by about 14.8 billion. So the entire recovery has been as a result of government spending. This, anemic though it is, there's actually been an increase in spending, which demonstrates to us that not that the austerity was necessary, but that what the government has done, or what's happened in the economy, that very anemic growth, is as a result of government intervention, not as a result of the private sector, because the private sector currently has about £750 million in the bank, in its banks, in its reserves, and it's not spending. So the government itself, and why is that? Because Osborne has recognised that the austerity programme simply hasn't worked. It needs to be registered, because that when we go on the mood music now, the Liberals and the Dem and the Tories will be, well, it was all worthwhile because the government cut back on expenditure, the economy started to expand and wasn't all worthwhile. And that's going to be a key theme, together with hostility, you know, together with the kind of Linton Crosby type approach in terms of immigration and all the rest of it. So that's on the economy, and that's why we're in the situation we're in. But the question really is what we can do. Well, I think the first thing we have to do, and it's very simple, aid and assist each other's struggle. And sometimes it'll come in from areas that we may not believe that was going to happen in that particular. So we have to be a bit imaginative in terms of our approach and our response. But of course, as you'll have seen this week, the CWU has got a big struggle in terms of the privatisation of Royal Mail. Now, why do they want to privatise Royal Mail? This is like, we're on now 21 years of opposing the privatisation of Royal Mail. We started under Heseltine and we defeated him. It's then started, there was a talk about a joint venture under Patricia Hewitt in 2001. Then 2007 when Alistair Darling was there. And then in 2009 when Mandelson, that was the last attempt to privatise Royal Mail under a Labour government. So much so that Peter Mandelson, he's supposed to be, isn't he? Yeah, Mr. Chris, he's supposed to be the most powerful Labour politician, he's a great expert in that. He wrote a book called The Third Man. And in the book, not that I pay attention, but it's on page 356, about the CWU. And he said this. He said the CWU, when he was trying to push his bill through Parliament, privatise Royal Mail, the CWU got up to every political trust in the book to defeat privatisation. I mean, that's a compliment indeed, coming from somebody like Mandelson. But if you listen to the media, you see, he's supposed to be this big, powerful guy, and you know, we couldn't defeat him, and we did. Of course, now with this coalition government, Tory government, we face a problem of privatisation. Yes, we had a campaign whilst we couldn't defeat the privatisation, to ameliorate the worst aspects of the bill, which has now become an act, and they're now talking of flotation. And we're still fighting, you know, we're still going to fight them. You know how difficult that is, but we're still continuing that campaign. But what is absolutely clear, whatever the outcome of the sale, we ain't going to see our people's terms and conditions eroded. We will fight them every step of the way, and that's why we've announced a ballot on strike action in Royal Mail to defend our members' terms and conditions. And that's not going to be any easy fight, and it will be a difficult and tough fight. But we're so confident of our position that we invited the Chief Executive of Royal Mail to come and address our reps on Wednesday. So every single representative in the UK, every delivery office, every mail centre got to hear from Moya Green why privatisation was such a good idea. And she went down, well, it just didn't float, if you like, on a particular option. So the argument was, these are the arguments. The first argument they used to say was about the pension fund deficit of about 28 billion. That's now being taken on by the government, and they've nationalised the debt and they want to privatise the problem. Then there was the issue of regulation, which I haven't got time to go into here, but about the kind of regulation that we have in this country, which is fiercer in this country than any other European country, which is basically anybody who wants to deliver mail can deliver mail. And the final one was access to private capital. You know, that's the Royal Mail needed money to modernise its company, and we don't disagree with that. But you know, we point out that Network Rail, nationalised under the Blairite minister, funnily enough, Stephen Byers, because the private sector had made such a hash of it, borrows currently about 31 billion, and it's looking to borrow another 50 billion, up to 50 billion, and that doesn't go on the PSBR, the public sector borrowing requirement. And similarly, there's talk of, well, it's going to be an extension of the Northern Line in London, and that's going to be £1 billion. The GLA is being allowed to borrow £1 billion. So, you know, we say it should be allowed to borrow on the open markets and get access to private capital. That's what they do in Canada, where Moya Green used to be the chief executive there. And not forgetting also, uniquely in this country, we have a separation of post office counters from Royal Mail. So post office counters are still held in the public sector, and we've had 11 days of strike action in post office counters. Our members in post office counters have been offered nothing in terms of a pay rise. In Royal Mail, we've been offered 8.6% over 3 years, still not sufficient. Of course, if you measure it against what's happening outside in the world, but we don't measure it like that. We look at less than inflation over 3 years, and there's lots of other conditions attached to that, which again, I haven't got time to go into. But first of all, so why do they want to privatise Royal Mail? And what is privatisation all about? Now, Ken Livingstone said a long time ago now, in 1988, when we were privatising the Jarrah Bank, the first privatisation of the postal industry, and he made this very pertinent point. It's not about the economics of privatisation. It's about all of us. It's about undermining and putting pressure on workers and seeking to divide workers from workers. And it's about destroying what we regard as collectivism and the trade union. But that's what it's really about. Because on every single simple economic argument, it's an attempt to undermine our terms and conditions. And that's, I think, in some ways, is a tribute to the strength of the CW and the problems that we've had to face and confront. So that's what it's essentially. Obviously, we need to deal with the question of the economy and all the rest of it, but we also have to understand what this is really all about in terms of seeking to undermine our people. So bad has been the attacks on our people in the Royal Mail and the Post Office. We've even the Post Office managers, which is small, the managers in Royal Mail and Post Office counters, which is a small number of the total workforce, but nonetheless not unimportant. Recently, they've just decided to vote for strike action in Post Office counters. The members of Unite, they've just decided to vote for strike action in Post Office counters. And that's the first time they've ever done it in 47 years. Now, we look forward to the managers in Royal Mail maybe following suit. We want to see if we can pursue that. But already they've taken a vote against strike. They've taken a vote against privatisation and the like within Royal Mail. That's why I say, you see, we can't be a bit routine about some of our struggles. We have to reach out and look for areas, in terms of the struggles that we face. And they won't always come at us from the most obvious areas. And it is about building the resistance to austerity. And it is about setting out an alternative. And we incidentally, on the Labour question, we intend to take the Labour Party conference, and we're confident all the unions will stand behind us. If this government get away with privatising Royal Mail, we want the Labour Party to commit from day one to the renationalisation of Royal Mail. Of the British public are opposed to the privatisation of Royal Mail. So we know we've got the argument, and I think that the problem of the moment is when there's almost like I've been involved in politics and trade unions for some time, and there's a term called triangulation, right? And what they do, they look at all the policies and they say, we'll try and get somewhere in the middle, and they do lots of focus groups and stuff like that. And I think it's almost to the point where it paralyses the political process. Because, sometimes you have to take a position on the basis of your guts and your analysis, and then fight for that position. That's what politics is about. They talk about the kind of politics being, nobody's interested in politics anymore. Nobody's interested in activity. But what's the point in getting engaged in an activity? And I say this because we're at the People's Assembly, if you like. What's the point in getting engaged in an activity if you come to a meeting where everyone agrees with everybody? You have to have discussion, debate and analysis in order to get a fight going. And that's what it's about, looking for the points where we agree with each other. And as far as I can see, I've been involved in the union and politics for some time now. The world is like this. It's dead simple. There's a lot of rich people up there, and there's a lot of poor people down there. And the rich blame the poor. And you have to get on the side of the poor and the oppressed and fight that lot back. I'll finish on this point. And there's a tweet called Injustice Facts. Here's a fact for you. And I've 2 final points. Here's a fact for you. The top 322 people on this planet, there's 9 billion people on the planet, the top 322 people have more wealth than the bottom 4 billion. Think about that. They have more money than the 4, and you know, child dies every 9 seconds in this world. Finally, I was on Any Questions last night with Jonathan Redmond, who voted against the war. Funny old where we live in. Norman Baker and Maria Eagle. And this question of Gove come up, about what Gove said about you've got to manage your money better and all this kind of thing, and so you don't avoid going to food banks. You know, what an absolute disgrace. In the 7th richest country in the world, right, that somebody can make that kind of comment and people are debating whether they, you know, what do you think about that? Absolute disgrace. What I said was, look, what Gove should do, and people like him, should live on the money that people have to live on, that forces them to go and get food from a food bank. That's the type of society what we're fighting against. That's the type of struggle that we're engaged in. We support your struggle, you support our struggle, and together we can push back this government and get it out of office as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Billy. The next speaker is Mike Higgins. He's from the Disabled People Against the Cuts, and he's going to tell us a bit about the work that their campaign group is doing. Cheers, Mike.
Good morning, comrades, sisters and brothers. Disabled People Against the Cuts and the Disabled People Direct Action Network welcomes the People's Assembly, which is long overdue, by the way. Long, long overdue. At long last, I hope we can now see a real drawing together of the opposition in campaigning, the disparate groups that have been out there fighting the Tories and the Lib Dems, and to some extent each other, and drawing together a real, meaningful opposition to the attacks on our people and our class. A group, in fact, that defends our class as much as the Tories and the Condems defend theirs. Disabled people desperately need action, a programme and a strategy which will defeat the Tories and the Condems. It's not an academic debate for us, or indeed for anyone here either. I've not got long, sorry, I was going to say. So I'm going to tell you a little bit, for those of you who don't know, about Disabled People Against the Cuts and about the Disabled People's Direct Action Network. First of all, DAN, for short, uses civil disobedience. So we get in the way, essentially. We block buses, occupy buildings, that kind of thing, in a very peaceful manner, of course. And historically, DAN, I think, is one of the organisations that's perhaps most responsible for us now having a completely accessible bus service in London, because they got fed up, frankly, of us blocking the streets, and that was a victory for disabled people and for everyone else too, I think. We also stopped the BBC telethon, and we've also brought about changes to the way that nursing homes are run by organisations like Leonard Cheshire and Scope and others. But that's not enough, of course. We also have campaigned locally here in Sheffield, for example, against both the Condems and, I have to say, the Labour Party's enormous increases in community care charges, where they try and charge us twice for things we pay for through our taxes. So that's our history. DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, was formed in 2010, and frankly, Dan is dwarfed by DPAC. DPAC was a response directly to the attacks by the Tories and the Condems on disabled people. Those of you who have access to the internet, which is probably the majority, I'd urge you to go to the DPAC website and have a look. It's the kind of alliances that's just been referred to by the comrade from the CWU. So dpac.uk.net. And also we've got groups on Facebook and Twitter as well, so have a look at those. DPAC had a very successful week of action at the start of September this year, including, and I'll just touch on a few of the highlights. On the 1st of September, by the way, did you see any of this in the media? I don't think so, unless you were looking in the right places, of course. DPAC occupied the lobby of the BBC in London to try and get some balance in the media reporting about benefits and the truth about benefits. Because the rate of the tabloid press and of the BBC and others like them is to call us scroungers. We're reintroducing the worthy and the unworthy poor, and the disabled people are definitely being described as the unworthy poor by the BBC and others. So we wanted to get the record straight about that. On the 5th of September, DPAC occupied the front lobby of the DWP in London. Yet to do it here in Sheffield, but hopefully soon. On the 4th of September, the Departments of Transport and the Departments of Health had a visit with a bit of theatre outside to entertain the politicians and the senior civil servants. Got a lot of support, incidentally, from the office workers there. Earlier in the week, also, the Departments of Education and Energy and Climate Change were blocked by DPAC. So we had a busy week at the beginning of September. Now, the only government response we've seen to all of this action is to describe us as unrepresentative of extremists. Well, let me say this, and it's not the first time I've said it either. I'm proud to be an extremist. If it's extreme to demand decent benefits, if it is extreme to demand free hospitals and healthcare and enough accessible housing for all, even now in the 21st century we don't have that. If it's extreme to demand a publicly run, owned and democratically controlled public transport and communication system, then I am an extremist. If it's extreme to expect jobs and an end to discrimination rather than bullying people off benefits to which they're entitled, then I am an extremist. If it is extreme to demand real work for real wages rather than the pittance and the 0 hours contracts we've got, then I am an extremist. By the way, where's Mr. Miliband on all of this? And exactly. And I would say it's not an extreme either to demand decency in old age, rather than tax cuts and evasion and avoidance by the rich for the rich. So yes, I am. If that's extreme, then I am an extremist. So, can I urge you, please, as well as visiting the DPAC website while you're on the web, have a look at the website of Inclusion London. Although it's a London-based organisation, it has actually had a national consultation with disabled people and has drawn up a manifesto of rights for disabled people. We want to get individuals. Okay, thank you. We want to get individuals, parties, community groups, and others, including trade union branches. And individual candidates, ideally, to endorse it before future elections. DPAC endorses the manifesto wholeheartedly. Please go to the site of Inclusion London and get your organisation to endorse it too. So finally, I've got... sorry, have a good day, that's what I'm going to say, have a good day in strategising and in organising and planning the next developments in the vital battle to defeat this hated government. DPAC supports the work of the People's Assembly here in Yorkshire and nationally, and wants to work with you to defeat the Condems and the Tories as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mike. I'm going to move straight on to our next speaker, who is Marion Nisbet, who's come down from Glasgow, from the Scottish Federation Against Bedroom Tax. Cheers.
Hi folks, first of all I just want to thank you for inviting me down, especially Gareth, who's my Facebook pal. I haven't seen you yet, Gareth, but hi, I believe you're here. So yeah, I'm an unemployed disabled worker and I'm directly affected by the bedroom tax. However, I think it's important to say that I have also been in my time a factory worker, a Marxist feminist, an addict, a postgrad student, a spinal injury patient, an addiction care manager, a victim, a survivor, a shop steward. I'm dead emotional, I'm pretty mental, I'm fabulous and I'm dyslexic. And I'm also very nervous. I'm also a member of the All Scotland Anti-Bedroom Tax Federation, which is the hat I've got on the day. So let's talk a wee bit about the bedroom tax. Well, housing benefit, right? It's a means-tested benefit. That means that you need to be poor to get it, okay? So my favourite description of the bedroom tax so far is that it's a poverty-seeking missile. And it is, you know? And the reality of it as well is that if you know, it can be up to 25% of your housing benefit if you've got 2 spare rooms. Now, where I live in Glasgow, that means £80 a month. So, if you've been found fit for work by Atos and you're unfortunate enough to have 2 spare rooms, which by the way is the majority of women my age or a bit older whose families have grown up and their so-called spare rooms are full of grandwains, or in my case nieces and nephews, when they, you know, they have no spare rooms, you know. But this means that basically, if you've got these 2 spare rooms, it's working out that you've got less than £50 a week to work on, you know, to pay your bills. And God help you if you're under 25, because that then comes down to £37 a week. So rising food prices, utility bills, council tax, even my mammy couldn't make it work. And by God, that woman had, you know, miracles with money. So, also to mention, 80% of the people that are affected by it are disabled people who already have been subjected to countless benefit cuts. And I think the bedroom tax for many disabled people was the tipping point where we said we'd had enough. You know, but it's also worth mentioning 50% of the people that claim housing benefit are actually working. You know, but they're earning such disgracefully low wages that they need to claim housing benefit. I was doing a bedroom tax stall in Glasgow last Saturday, and a guy jumped out a lorry on a Saturday morning, he's covered in oil and he's in his ovies, and this guy's affected by the bedroom tax. And I'm saying to myself, Britain in the 21st century, and a guy's out grafting on a Saturday morning, and he's having to claim benefits. What is it all about, you know? So all of this, on top of universal credit and the dreaded sanctioning, it's going to cause absolute misery for the most vulnerable in our society. So why are they doing all this? Well, they tell us that they need to reduce the welfare bill by 500 million. In the same week, they introduced a tax break for the top millionaires that came to 610 million. They spent 10 million burying a despicable warmonger Thatcher. We have the 4th largest military budget in the world. This really blew me away when I was looking it up on the internet. It was like, you know, Japan, China, I mean, all these huge continents, and then Britain. And it's like, talk about punching above your weight, you know. But also the most despicable figure that I found is that you, the taxpayer, paid £1.6 billion to Atos to terrorise disabled folk. And that is what they're doing. They're terrorising us. I've been subjected to an Atos assessment, and I can assure you, brothers and sisters, it's got absolutely nothing to do with my ability to work. It was purely to frighten me and humiliate me. So while they're doing this, while they're frightening you and humiliating you, their boss gave himself a bonus of £280,000. That is on top of his £2.5 million salary, you know. So, let's be totally blatantly honest about this. It's got absolutely nothing to do with saving money. It's part of the wider attack on our welfare and a starting point in the dismantling of our welfare state. A welfare state that my parents were extremely proud of, constantly telling me how well off I was, you know, and I did kind of take it for granted. But it's also a blatant attack on social housing. How dare they attack the idea of an affordable family home for working class people? You know, and that is what they're attacking, you know. If life throws you a bad turn, you could go back to your mammies. Well, no anymore, because your mammy's not allowed to have a spare room. You know, I've heard countless heartbreaking stories over the bedroom tax, which I'm sure you all have, you know. A guy, Mick, came to one of their meetings in Govan Hill. Mick had worked his whole life. He's got MS. His wife's his carer. You know, along with his MS, he has breathing difficulties, he has leg spasms, he's up and doing all night, he gets very little sleep, you know. So his wife needs to sleep in the spare room, because if she's going to care for him, she needs to get some sleep. So that woman is being taxed for loving somebody, you know, and she's also saving the state an absolute fortune in care costs. So, who thought it up? Well, it was a big galoot called Lord Freud. And I want to quote him here. He says, if disabled people want a spare room, they should get a job and pay for it. This man has got absolutely no idea of the brutality of most workplaces. He's got no idea of the institutional discrimination against disabled people. And this guy gets £1,000 a day for turning up and signing his name in a book. Well, even with my condition, folks, I could do that. So if there's a job going, let me know, you know. He also has 12 spare rooms in his house. So I don't think that Lord Freud really understands the dimensions of my wee 4-block council house, you know. You can barely get privacy for the family, never mind the idea of moving a complete stranger into your house, you know. So he's went with this great idea to his pals in the cabinet, who incidentally, out of 29 of them, 23 of them were millionaires. But on top of being millionaires, they're sitting with their 65 grand a year salary. On top of that, they get £160 a week food allowance. Now, I said that at a meeting in Glasgow the other night, and a woman piped up, you could feed your whole close on that. And it's true. A close, by the way, is a tenements, you know, just in case you don't understand what I'm talking about. And it's absolutely true. That's more than I spend a month on my messages, you know. So they also decided they needed an extra 10 grand this year, and on top of that, they decided that they would give themselves an extra 2 grand allowance for each child. Now, I don't have wings, but see if you're sitting out there and you've had your child tax credit cut and all the rest of it, get angry, you know? Because this is all being paid. If you're working, you're paying for all of this, you know? And this idea that we're all in it together, my arse. You know? And I promised my sister I wouldn't swear in front of Tony Bennett, so he's not here. As I said, every day you're hearing heartbreaking stories, you know. A guy who slashed his wrists in the housing office, another guy that slashed his throat in the benefit office, you know. Women jumping out of windows, holding onto their wings because they can't cope. You know, and they're sitting down there telling us that we need to budget our money better. It just, you know, it really, really makes me angry, and I'm hoping it's making you angry, I know. So, you've been busy down here, but we've been fighting back in Scotland, and I want to tell you a wee bit of what we've been doing. It's a strong roots movement, and it is dominated by working class women. We've had really lively local meetings. And we are finding more and more that working class women are starting to find their political voice again through the Federation. In Fife so far we've managed to win 4 appeals for 4 separate disabled people, and that fight is ongoing. 8,000 people marched in George Square when it was first announced. That is the biggest demo that we've had since the poll tax. We've formed the All Scotland Anti-Bedroom Tax Federation. We've got Glasgow Unite, Glasgow Unison and many other unions that have signed up to the Federation, but we want more, keep coming. Glasgow, Edinburgh and Dundee Trades Councils have signed up to the Federation. The Govan Law Centre has presented a petition to the Scottish Parliament asking for a small change in Scots law, which means that the threat of eviction would be removed. That is an ongoing fight. It's went to the Welfare Reforms Committee. Council leaders are apologising left, right and centre, SNP and Labour. They're promising inquiries about these terrible letters that should never have been sent out, but they were bloody sent out. You know, to women in wheelchairs being threatened with eviction for something arrears of £240, you know. So we need to be aware of the smoke and mirror no eviction policy, because a lot of the time when you look at these policies, it's actually no evictions for 12 months, and we're still going to drag you through the courts and we're still going to get your last penny off you. But the most important thing about the Federation is that we are demanding a no eviction policy, and we're demanding a drop of the debt, and we're demanding that we have a society that empowers and enables vulnerable people. We've even got the UN telling them off, and they're really balking at that one. Promised 20 million to combat the impact. It's going to take 53 million in Scotland, so we're keeping the pressure on. You know, today my comrades are outside the Lib Dem conference, hopefully making an awful lot of noise to basically let them know we're not accepting it. But the important thing is we've created an anti-eviction army that's going to protect the vulnerable should the sheriff be stupid enough to come calling, you know. We've also got a national conference on the 5th of October. Quick bit of history. In the Highland clearances in the 1880s, countless tales of women battering and stripping eviction officers and withholding their rent. In 1915, Mary Barber and other women got together and organised. They overcame the sectarianism and the cultural differences within the communities. They were backed by the strong trade unions of the Red Clydeside. And that is the important point today, folks. We're not going to win it in the communities alone, but if we get the unions on side with us, I really do think we've got them on the run over this. In the 1990s, the poll tax, not one warrant sale was carried out in Scotland, and we intend to maintain our good reputation, you know. I'm proud to be a member of the 21st century version of Mary Barber's army, because we're all Mrs. Barber. Unity is our best weapon. This is a war on welfare, and we need to fight back by any means necessary. And we all need to stop fighting with each other. The People's Front of Judea, I'm sick to the back teeth of it, you know. We all need to get together and fight the real enemy, you know. You need to get out into your community. They've got us all convinced that, oh, don't talk to your neighbour because they're either a terrorist or a paedophile. Rubbish. Get out there and talk to your neighbours. You know, get into the schemes, chat the doors, get to these vulnerable women and families, because it is mostly women that are being affected by it. Let them know that they're no longer alone. Encourage them to get politically active. Encourage civil disobedience. Street meetings, Saturday stalls, political busking, anything you like. You know, it was absolutely no surprise to me when I heard that it was factory lassies that started the Egyptian revolution, because I've been a factory lassie, and I also know what it feels like. And I told an MSP recently that you've left, you know, when you've got nothing left to lose. You took my DLA, you took my job, now you want my house? I don't think so, you know. My mammy told me what it was like before we had a welfare state and an NHS, and we all lived in single ends in Glasgow, you know. I'm not going back to damp single ends with no social work, no NHS. It actually scares me. We need to hold the line on this and don't let them divide and rule. We need to join the global fight in austerity, and why bother? Because capitalism is best described for me by Dolly Parton. It's a rich man's game no matter what you call it, and you'll spend your life putting money in his pocket. Let's make it clear, let's make fair change sides from Cairo to Castlemilk. Thanks very much, brothers.
Thanks for that, Marion. It's a horrible job having to make these people shut up. It's really frustrating. Marion is doing a workshop if anybody who wants to talk more. Our next speaker is Andrew Murray from Unite the Union. I'll just pass straight on.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to bring greetings from Unite to this South Yorkshire People's Assembly. Of course, in polite society now, bringing greetings from Unite is a bit like a kiss of death. Because, I don't know if you noticed, every Prime Minister's question now, every week in the House of Commons, every day in the media, Unite is being attacked. We've been attacked for our political work, we've been attacked for allegedly not paying tax. This comes from a government run by and for tax avoiders, and they're telling trade unions to get our money from our members that we should be paying tax. We're being attacked for allegedly having a guide to how to conduct a strike, day in, day out. This is a Linton Crosby message, no doubt. It's time to attack Unite. I'm sure if England don't qualify for the World Cup, it'll all be blamed on Len McCluskey. But at least, as the saying goes, if the enemy's attacking you, you're probably doing the right thing. And Unite has been proud to support the National People's Assembly and to support the People's Assemblies up and down the country because we realise that we need to fight in a new sort of way against what is going on. The last time we had a class war Conservative government in power in the 1980s, when we had similar attacks on the trade unions, similar vituperation, it was different, I think, from how it is today in one respect. Then there was an attack on what were strong organisations, strong working class communities. It was a class war, but clearly with two sides. Today, the attack has been waged much more on people who are isolated, who are vulnerable, who don't have organisations to go to in many cases, who are left trying to cope with the attack on their own, and that is something we cannot let happen. And that is why we have to say, Marion was absolutely right. She said the community can't do it on its own without the trade unions, but the reverse is true as well. We can't get anywhere without the trade unions, but the trade unions on their own cannot fight and win this battle because it goes much wider, and that is the importance of the People's Assembly. The People's Assembly, I think it's about 100 been established like this all around the country since the Great Day in London a couple of months ago, and these are organisations not just to make propaganda about the cuts and the destitution that's been forced on millions of people, but to actually organise a fight back on a broad basis that brings in not just the unions, the community groups representing the disabled, the groups representing working women, groups representing immigrants and black people, often under the most vicious attack, but bringing in everyone who is suffering from this government's attacks. And there's so many of them. Obviously, Michael has given a very vivid account of what's happening to the disabled, but I just wanted to quickly read something I read in The Guardian earlier on this week about a guy called Andrew Fullick, who's had to stop work because he had a heart attack. He's living with diabetes, his sight is deteriorating, he's suffering hearing loss, he has nerve damage in his hands and legs, and has arthritis. He was on benefits of under £100 a week, but it was something. Then, as part of a reassessment by Atos, he was told he was no longer eligible for the new incapacity benefit. His benefits should be stopped immediately. He was fit for work, he should go and find a job, and he isn't even eligible for job seekers' allowance. Now, the question that arises for me out of this story, and I'm sure it could be repeated many times over, is why do we still carry on as if Atos was, in a way, a normal business going about its work? We have to be clear, Atos is a criminal conspiracy against the poor. And furthermore, Atos has addresses, it has names, and we should stop it from going about its business in any way that we find we can. I mean, it's bedroom tax. Well, again, I can't add anything to what Marion has said in her vivid account of what's happening in the bedroom tax. But when even the United Nations are saying this is violating fundamental human rights, and you can tell from how angry the government was in response, they know they've been rumbled on this. And of course, the bedroom tax is only part of the attack on people's housing. I mean, particularly in London, I'm sure it's not unique to London, there's a policy of social cleansing going on, people being driven out of their homes. In one primary school where I live in North London, 20% of the children in one class have had to leave school because their parents are no longer able to live in the houses they were in. And for every one of those people leaving, that is ruptured friendships, that's turmoil being brought into their lives, that's our education being impeded, and this is being repeated throughout the country. In East London, we have people living in garden sheds, families living in containers because the housing crisis is so bad, and at the other end of London, in Belgravia, we have multi-million-pound mansions that have been bought for an investment and are left empty for 11 months of the year by the super rich. We have the rise of Wonga, a company designed solely to get rich out of other people's poverty. It's not about lifting the poor out of poverty, it's about finding ways to take more money out of them to make some greedy capitalists richer. And we have the food banks, perhaps the most degraded symptom of what our civilization is coming to. When people, including pregnant, expectant mothers, pregnant women, mothers with very small children, having to queue for food because they can get no benefit and no help any other way. And I think it's one thing that the People's Assemblies we shouldn't just be condemning the food banks, we should be getting down there, not to criticise the people that are running them at all, the charities and the voluntary sector, but we need to not just complain about things on behalf of the poor, we need to be fighting with the poor to bring these scandals to an end. And of course, it isn't just about the poor, people that aren't in work, that can't work, that are suffering. Workers too are now suffering. Real pay is falling at the fastest rate since 1870. When Queen Victoria was on the throne, when no women and not many men had the right to vote, and there was hardly any trade unions, and Britain was fighting a lot of colonial wars. So some things don't change, but this is the scale of the attack on living standards going on, and that, in a way, provides the basis for a united fight. It's not a sense now that, as it has been perhaps in some economic crises in the past, where the people at the bottom are really suffering, but other people are maybe doing all right. Now this is an attack on which everyone is suffering, and trade unions and the community needs to be fighting it together. We have the People's Assembly put out a call for November the 5th, a day of action of civil disobedience. That should be carried out around the country. We ought to find imaginative ways to highlight the need to the food banks, housing, the attack on ATAS, whatever it is, whatever seems appropriate. There's a demonstration at the Tory conference about the National Health Service on September the 29th. Everybody needs to get there to make it a huge explosion of anger. Of course, it's mainly about the National Health Service. That's the leading issue. The greatest symbol of the welfare state, the achievements of the war generation and of the 1945 government, but of course it's about all the other attacks as well. And we need to realise that the TUC last week, or earlier this week, passed a resolution saying we want to have a midweek day of action with demonstrations not just on a Saturday but during the week that can be tied up with such industrial action as can be organised as well to really lift the temperature of the fight against this government. So there's plenty of things to do, as well as stopping evictions, other local actions. As I said earlier, the People's Assembly cannot just be about protesting and moving on, it has to be about action and fighting. I want to give one, perhaps change hats for just a minute, because as well as representing Unite here, I have been involved in the Stop the War Coalition since its foundation. And there's one important lesson we've seen in the last 2 weeks, where it seems like, touch wood, another bloody war, this time against Syria, might have been averted. Lots of people say, MPs are patting themselves on the back, I don't don't mind that for having done it. But let's be clear, if war has been stopped, it is mainly because of the work done by millions of people marching and demonstrating over the years from 2003 onwards to make us and that is important. Because why are the government getting away with this so far? Why? Because the elite in this country doesn't mainly rule by violence. May do if it had to, but it doesn't mainly. It rules because it tells us there's no point in doing anything about it. Because it says protest is ultimately futile. You can have your day at the ballot box, but don't bother about anything else. And that's echoed, unfortunately, by the right wing in our own movement sometimes, that protest doesn't work. Well, I think the example of the anti-war movement shows that, of course, it can work, and that if we keep on struggling, we will make a difference. But there is one difference. Maybe the Stop the War coalitions had to wait 10 years for vindication. We can't afford to wait 10 years for vindication now. We can't even afford to wait till 2015 to stop what this government is doing in its tracks. So I'd like to end by repeating what I said at the National People's Assembly. If our government wants to make pregnant women queue at food banks for food, if you want to make our young people work for nothing, if it wants to kick the disabled out of their homes, if it wants to demonise immigrants, if it wants to do all these things, if this is its idea of governing, then our job is to make this country ungovernable.
Our next speaker, we've got two left in case anybody's starting to feel the need to go to the loo or have a break. We've got two speakers left, so they're well worth listening to, so don't feel too wriggly in your seats. Our next speaker is Abdul Gooljar, who joins us from the Islamic Society of Britain. Cheers, and thanks, Abdul.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk at the Assembly. We are living in a challenging time. As we are talking about austerity, we must not forget through the back door what's happening. You have UKIP is bullying the government about immigration. You have the government now in London, there's a bus is going around. Say if you're an illegal immigrant, give yourself up. Now asking yourself, is that morally acceptable? Suddenly we forget, in the 60s this country needed immigrants. I come here, I was asked, we were shortage of staff in the National Health Service. I'm a qualified nurse, I come here, work in the National Health Service. I left National Health Service 15 years ago, now I'm a qualified social worker. It still contributes to the tax, it still contributes to the society in various ways. But the government of the day does not acknowledge the contribution of the immigrant in this country, whether it is corner shop, whether it is in the civil service, social service, across the board. But suddenly, they want to use austerity to say the problem is not with the cuts. The problem, we have too many immigrants in this country. And together we have to send a message. We want to live in a society where there is fairness, where there is justice for all. We don't accept divide and rule. Comrade, we are facing another challenge. The challenge of the rise of the far right. Ideal is going around the country are creating havoc. Until now the government has never labeled them as extremists. They were recently in Sheffield, cost the taxpayers £500,000. You need to be aware of that. At a time when there's cuts, soon we won't be able to live and drink and eat. And yet suddenly we spend £500,000 to police Sheffield to have order to let ADL come in Sheffield with travel. Now you need to ask yourself, as human being, is it acceptable when the church and mosques are going together to give food bank, to helping the poor and needy, and we're wasting up and down the country 300,000, 500,000 to police the street, to let, I'm not saying that you don't have a freedom of speech. Everything has got its limits. Everything has got its boundary. But EDL are going up the country, up and down the country. Everywhere they have been has been destroyed. There have been fights on the street. Who paid for all this? It's time we start asking the question. We have to have a society, like I've said every time in my public speech. I'm looking justice for all. One law for all. And if we keep quiet, we are morally bankrupt. It's unacceptable. We have to voice our view to the politicians, to the councillors. Enough is enough. On the 21st of September, the EDL are planning to return back to Sheffield. And you all need to rally together. Say to EDL, you are not welcome to Sheffield. Sheffield, I'm proud to be a citizen of Sheffield, where there's a richness of diverse culture, where we all, regardless our race, our color, our faith, we live together. Together we celebrate one Sheffield, many culture. Together we build a prosperous Sheffield, where we all are friends, neighbors of each other. We want to keep Sheffield to continue this way. We should not allow EDL to come here to demolish this peace, this good neighborhood, which have taken many years to build, and to allow them to come here in one day to destroy it. Now let me tell you something final. I go in school, I do assembly for the last 20 years. The last time EDL came to Sheffield was recently, when I went back to school, talking to the children during my assembly. When assembly finished, 2 children came to me. One was 7 years old, another one was 12 years old. They said, Mr. Abdul, EDL said to me, you're a terrorist, are you? I say, I leave you to judge. A 7 years old are saying to me, Abdul, the EDL said, you're a terrorist, are you? And a 12 years old said to me, when EDL come here, there's an atmosphere in our school between the white and non-white. And you all need to think about that very carefully. What sort of society are we living in? Do we want to be a part of a society to create division, to create fear? Or we want to be living in a society where we all respect one another, care for one another? This is a society I want for my children and grandchildren. I'm sure here in this room you all want it. So together, let's celebrate justice, fairness, equality, and together let's build a society where we say no to racism, where we say no to Islamophobia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abdul, for that. I'll introduce our final speaker. We have with us this morning Beth Davies from the MU team.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. And I am proud to announce that on the 1st of October, this region will be taking industrial action. Our teachers will be leaving their schools and fighting against the oppression of Michael Gove's policies on privatising education as they fight for their pay conditions as well. Thank you very much. I'm going to start by talking about the state sector, however, something we got Ed Miliband to pledge in the recent TUC Congress, and I am delighted about that. I'm proud to have been educated in the state sector. I'm proud to have worked as a teacher and latterly as a head teacher for more than 36 years in the state sector. I'm proud that I live and work in a country, Wales, which still fully supports state education. I'm not proud that I'm now witnessing the dismantling of state education under the present Tory government in England. Having trained to be a teacher in the mid-1970s, I received a student grant, had no student debt, and had the benefit of attending a first-class teacher training college. Now, under the present government, there has been a dramatic change to the way teachers are trained, and there has been a substantial attack on professional teacher status. And I cannot imagine the damage this will do in the future. What is happening in England under Michael Gove? As of the 1st of July of this year, there were 1,642 open secondary academies, equivalent to 50% of all secondary schools. There were 1,278 primary academies, equivalent to 7.6% of all primary schools. The local and democratically accountable system of oversight and support for schools is being eroded. Public land and assets are being transferred to academy trusts, which are charities, but which may have been set up by private companies. It is an open secret that if elected to a second term, the current Education Secretary plans to allow schools to be run for profit. A number of multinational firms are involved in the Academies programme and selling school support services. Then there are free schools, which are eating up a disproportionate amount of the education budget at a time when other schools are struggling to balance their budgets and are unable to access capital funding for desperately needed rebuilding programmes or to expand local provision in areas of shortage. The government has allocated £1.7 billion of capital funding, that is taxpayers' money, for free schools, which are opening where they are not needed or wanted. These schools are now removed from state, therefore, local authority control. And let me give you some facts about this region. In the Yorkshire Humber region, free schools, this term saw the opening of a new secondary free school in Hull, the Boulevard Academy, at a capital cost of £8 million. It opened with just 43 students on the 9th of September. This is in an area where local secondary schools are predicted to have spare capacity of over 5,000 places, 30% more than required, in the secondary phase by 2015-16. So surely this school must have had deep popular support? Well, during the official consultation report for the school, carried out by a private education consultancy, it was noted that, overall, 71 respondents of the questionnaire agreed that the Secretary of State should open the school. That was actually 7 people. It stated in the programme that it was a very popular choice. In fact, according to the report, a total of 7 questionnaire responses were returned. In the Yorkshire and Humber region, there are now over 300 academies with more than 60 schools operating within larger chains. The Yorkshire Post reported in June that around £9 million had been top sliced in the past 3 years from primary and secondary academies in the region in order to pay for the chain's central services, which include wages of several chief executives who earned more than £150,000, and a Director General whose take-home pay was around £280,000 a year. 4 of the biggest chains operating in Yorkshire, EACT, SPTA and Outward Grange Academies Trust, have all paid their most senior figures' salaries greater than the Prime Minister. An official investigation into the EACT has revealed a culture of extravagant expenses. And all this at a time when child poverty figures are rising and children are arriving in school hungry and dreading the school holidays because they don't know where their next meal is coming from. And recent benefit changes could also be affecting those children even worse. Well, now let us look at state education and why we in the NUT are fighting for it. Education Department was set up in 1902 when legislation was passed to allow local authorities to do so. If you do your maths, that is 111 years of experience and local knowledge that is intrinsically woven into the fabric of our schools and the communities they serve. The supportive environments of local authorities providing training services and personnel services, building services and finance officers, etc. All of these departments working together and having a deep knowledge of their schools. They provide facilities time for representatives of trade unions and have a local bargaining and policy decisions are woven into the legal rights of their employees. They are challenged by the professionals, but the most important thing is here that they know their schools and they know their communities. They have strategic education plans which look at the issues of surplus places or lack of places, as the case may be. As a professional of many, many years, I've had to deal with thousands of children. But during the last 3 years, I've seen more families than ever come to school stressed by the economic situation. Children in my school have been provided with free school meals and free breakfasts by the local authority. And shockingly, a child's mother rang school just a few months ago before I left to take up my post in the NUT to tell me she couldn't bring him to school for the week because she couldn't afford to buy him a pair of shoes. And what of the future for the vulnerable children in the local authorities as they're being dismantled? I visited members in the southeast of England just a few months ago. The school there was a state school and it was surrounded by academies and free schools. That following year they were going to be closed down. For what reason? Very good school. They were being squeezed out by privatisation. In that audience was a young man, and as he told his story, it was harrowing. He said, and he started to cry, and he'd been teaching 20 years, "My family don't believe that I work hard anymore. Such is the power of the Tory press, telling everyone that teachers don't work hard." In addition to all of this, we are seeing a selection process in these academies, which often precludes children from attending due to their ability and socio-economic backgrounds. And in the recent TUC Congress at Bournemouth, the NUT called upon the trade union movement to help us campaign for a restoration of local authorities and well-funded state education system which supports all children and is fair and accountable to all. I ask that you all support us in our fight on the 1st of October. Thank you very much.